The rain had been falling steadily for hours, drumming a quiet rhythm against the windows of Laura Bennett's house in Portland. The streets outside were slick and shiny, the streetlights reflecting in the puddles like tiny flickering stars. Inside the house was warm and softly lit, the kind of place where you could feel safe from the storm outside. Laura sat on her favorite sofa, a thick cream-colored blanket wrapped around her shoulders, trying to calm the restless thoughts that had been swirling all day. It was Friday night, her designated movie night with Ethan, her 17-year-old son, and she had been looking forward to it all week. These nights had always been a small ritual between them, way to reconnect after a long week. It's a little pocket of normalcy and comfort in their busy lives. Ethan had grown so much over the past year that Laura sometimes struggled to see the boy she once knew. His frame had stretched, his shoulders had broadened, and his voice now carried a deeper timbre that hinted at adulthood. Yet there was still a softness in his eyes that reminded her of the child who used to curl up next to her during thunderstorms. He lounged across the room in an oversized chair, his feet barely touching the floor, headphones dangling around his neck. Despite his teenage nonchalance, there was a nervous energy about him, kind of tension Laura had come to recognize as the marker of something important waiting to be said. "I picked the movie," Ethan said suddenly, holding up a DVD case. With a hesitant smile. "You don't have to like it, but I think it's good." His words were casual, but the slight tremor in his voice betrayed his underlying apprehension. Laura smiled, trying to mirror his calm. "Okay, kiddo, let's see what you've got. I trust your taste." She had always found joy in his opinions, in seeing him take ownership of little decisions that had once been hers alone. She moved closer, adjusting the blanket around her and picking up the remote. The soft glow of the lamp lit his face, showing the faint freckles that had yet to disappear, with age and the serious look in his brown eyes. She felt a rush of nostalgia mixed with pride and something she couldn't quite name, a quiet longing for the closeness that had defined their evenings for so long. The movie began, and at first it was simple entertainment. Light, funny, with just enough romantic tension to make Laura smile at the innocence of it. But soon as the characters' lives unfolded on screen, she found herself slipping into reflection. She noticed small details in Ethan's reactions, the way he laughed at certain jokes, the way he seemed genuinely moved by tender moments between the characters. Watching him, Laura felt a familiar ache in her chest, a bittersweet mixture of pride and sadness. He was no longer a child, yet he still carried fragments of the boy who had once leaned against her shoulder during long nights of thunder and rain. At one point, during a quiet, tender scene, Laura's mind wandered far from the movie. She thought about how her life had changed over the last few years, the long hours at work, the solitude that often followed, and the quiet spaces that had once felt empty but now seemed filled with small, fleeting moments she hadn't allowed herself to cherish. Her gaze drifted to Ethan. He caught her watching him and nudged her lightly. "You okay?" he asked, concern softening his words. Laura nodded, forcing a smile she hoped looked natural. "Yeah, just thinking." She realized with a slight pang of guilt that she hadn't shared much of herself with him lately, not the real thoughts that lingered at night when she was alone. These moments were supposed to be theirs, yet somehow she had let life's noise intrude. The storm outside grew heavier, the rain now drumming against the roof with more insistence. Laura felt a strange intimacy in the enclosed, dimly lit room, a feeling that was both comforting and dangerous. It was the kind of quiet that made people confront truths they often avoided. And then she heard the words she hadn't expected. "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." Laura froze, her heart skipping a beat. There was a seriousness in Ethan's tone, a weight she hadn't heard before. She felt an instant tightening in her chest, a mix of anticipation and fear. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked gently, her voice low, careful not to startle him. He hesitated, glancing down at his hands, twisting his fingers together. Laura noticed the nervous tension in his shoulders, the slight quiver in his voice. I know about you and David. The words hit her like a thunderclap. David, her friend, the man who had been her anchor in lonely moments, the one whose presence had always stirred something warm and fragile inside her. David. How could Ethan have found out? She had been so careful. She had never intended for this secret to reach him, yet here it was, laid bare in the quiet living room. Punctuated by the patter of rain, Laura's mind raced. Part of her wanted to retreat into denial, too. Tell him he had misunderstood. But another, quieter part felt a sense of relief. Ethan had been honest, and now there was no hiding. The truth had entered the room, and it demanded acknowledgement. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, Ethan continued, his voice shaking slightly. I found the messages. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to be honest. Laura felt a complex knot of emotions twist in her chest. Shame, fear, relief, and something akin to hope swirled together in a way that made it hard to breathe. She remembered all the quiet nights she had spent longing for connection, for affection, for the kind of understanding she now realized Ethan was capable of offering. He was no longer just a child in need of protection. He was a young man, capable of empathy, of acceptance, of seeing her as both a mother and a human being with desires, fears, and mistakes. She took a slow, deliberate breath. "Ethan, it's complicated," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," he replied, his own voice quiet but steady. I want you to be happy. And I want to understand." The rain intensified, streaking the windows with silver lines that reflected the dim light of the lamp. The room felt small, intimate, almost suspended in time. Laura realized that tonight was no longer just about a movie. It was about honesty, about the shifting dynamics between herself and her son, about a truth that could either break them or bring them closer. Before she could respond, the sound of the doorbell cut through the tension like a knife. Both Laura and Ethan froze. Who could be visiting at this hour in such a storm? Laura's heart raced as she moved toward the door. Every step seemed heavy, each one charged with uncertainty. She opened it slowly and froze, standing there, soaked from the rain, holding a barely functional umbrella. Was David. His hair clung to his forehead, droplets of water running down the collar of his jacket. Despite the storm, his smile was warm, familiar, and somehow filled with a vulnerability that made Laura's chest tighten. "Hey, I thought I'd come by," he said, shaking off the rain. "You didn't answer my texts?" Laura stepped aside, motioning him in, the warmth of the house enveloping him in. Her? Ethan watched silently from the sofa, his expression unreadable. A mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and quiet acknowledgement. Laura's heart fluttered with anticipation, relief, and a lingering nervousness. The simple movie night had transformed into a moment that would change everything. David shook off the water, and the room seemed charged with a kind of electric tension that neither Laura nor Ethan could ignore. He looked around briefly, his gaze landing on Ethan, and nodded politely. Then turned back to Laura with a softness in his eyes that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. Laura poured him a cup of tea, her hands slightly trembling as they met. She handed it to him, and their fingers brushed. The contact was fleeting, but it carried an undercurrent of something unspoken. Something that had always existed quietly between them, but had never been acknowledged so directly. Ethan's gaze remained on them, thoughtful but strangely accepting. Laura realized that he wasn't angry, confused, or judgmental. He was observing, trying to understand, and in his own way, giving her permission to exist fully in her emotions. The rain continued, outside, relentless, as if marking the passing of an old chapter and the uncertain beginning of a new one. Laura sank back slightly into the sofa, her heart still racing, her mind spinning with questions about what the night might bring. She looked at Ethan, then at David, and realized that the normalcy of their little movie night had been replaced by something more profound, more human, more vulnerable. And as the wind rattled the windows and the rain soaked the world outside, Laura understood that nothing would ever be the same again. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside her. A truth had been revealed, a secret no longer hidden. And yet, beneath the tension, there was a fragile thread of hope. A possibility that perhaps honesty, courage, and love could coexist in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. She glanced at Ethan, who offered a small, tentative smile. Then at David, whose eyes seemed to hold a question, a longing, and a promise. And she realized tonight a door had opened and she had no choice but to step through it. David shook off the last droplets of rain as he stepped fully into the living room. The warmth of Laura's house enveloped him, chasing away the chill that clung to his jacket and soaked hair. Laura poured him a cup of tea, hands slightly trembling. As she handed it over, the steam curling upward and mingling with the tension in the room. The faint scent of rain and warm wood combined with the rich aroma of tea, creating a cocoon that made everything else fade away. Ethan remained on the sofa, his posture upright yet relaxed, watching silently. Laura could feel the weight of his gaze, a mixture of curiosity, concern, and subtle acceptance. It surprised her that despite being 17, he seemed to understand more than she had expected. The room was quiet for a moment, save for the gentle hum of the heater and the rhythmic patter of rain against the window. David looked at Laura with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. "You look surprised," he said softly, shaking off his wet hair and sitting near the window. His presence filled the room, not in a loud or overwhelming way, but in the quiet strength and warmth that had drawn her to him in the first place. "I didn't expect you to be here alone." Laura smiled nervously, setting down the cup of tea she had been holding. I wasn't expecting you either. I mean, I didn't think you'd come in the storm like this." She laughed softly, though it trembled with the mixture of nervousness and anticipation that coursed through her chest. "I wanted to," David admitted. "I couldn't stop thinking about you, about us." His words were simple, yet they carried weight. They reminded Laura of nights spent alone, imagining what it might be like to share more than fleeting messages or stolen conversations. She realized her pulse had quickened, a warmth spreading through her chest that made her cheeks flush. Ethan shifted slightly on the sofa, clearing his throat. Laura glanced at him, noticing the seriousness in his eyes. "Mom, can I ask something?" he said, voice soft but firm. "Of course," Laura said immediately, sitting a little straighter. "Do you like him?" His question hung in the room, delicate yet direct. There was no accusation, no judgment, only an earnest desire to understand. Laura took a slow breath, feeling the honesty of the moment sink in. She looked at David, who was quietly observing, his expression unreadable yet expectant. Then she met Ethan's eyes. "Yes," she said softly, almost whispering the word. "I like him. I care about him." Ethan nodded slowly, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Then I think you should be happy. You deserve it, Mom." His words were simple, but their impact was profound. For the first time, Laura realized that her secret, though heavy with guilt and fear, did not have to carry shame. Her son's acceptance brought a sense of relief she hadn't expected. David reached for her hand, brushing it lightly with his fingertips. The contact was small, fleeting, yet it sent a shiver down Laura's spine. It was a silent acknowledgement of connection, an unspoken promise, and a comfort that had been absent for too long. Laura felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a mix of trust, longing, quiet desire. Ethan watched them, his expression thoughtful. He wasn't embarrassed or upset. He seemed to understand the nuances of adult emotions in a way that both impressed and touched Laura deeply. She realized that her bond with him had shifted, was no longer just mother and child, but something more layered, more honest, capable of encompassing the complexity of love and relationships. The Storm outside continued, a steady rhythm that contrasted with the emotional turbulence inside the room. Laura felt her thoughts racing, caught between the comfort of the present and the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. Yet, in that moment, she allowed herself to feel the warmth of David's hand in hers, the quiet support of her son, and the safety of their shared space. "You know," David said quietly, breaking the silence, "I've thought about this moment a lot. About seeing you, talking to you, being here. I didn't know how you'd react. I didn't know if Ethan, if any of this would be okay." His eyes were steady, earnest, revealing vulnerability beneath the confident exterior he usually carried. Laura smiled softly, squeezing his hand. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's more than okay. It's real. It's honest. And that matters more than anything." Ethan shifted again, settling back into the sofa. "I just want you both to know that I'm not upset," he said. "I might not understand everything yet, but I see that you care about each other. That's enough for me." Laura's chest tightened, a mixture of pride, relief, and emotional overwhelm washing over her. Her son was growing into a thoughtful, empathetic young man. His acceptance of her feelings, his willingness to embrace the complexity of adult relationships, left her both grateful and unexpectedly emotional. David leaned a little closer, their hands still touching. "I don't want to rush anything," he said, voice low, careful. "I just want to be here, with you, and with him, too. If that's okay?" Laura nodded, her heart swelling. "It's more than okay," she said again. "It feels right. Even now." The words were soft, almost a confession, and they seemed to carry the weight of months. Even years of longing, uncertainty, and quiet hope. The rain outside began to lighten, the storm easing into a gentle drizzle. The room was quiet, but it felt alive with possibility. Laura looked at Ethan, who gave her a small, encouraging smile, then at David, whose gaze was tender and patient. And she realized something profound. Tonight had started as a simple movie night, but it had transformed into a moment of truth, honesty, and connection that she would carry with her forever. David's presence, Ethan's acceptance, and the quiet intimacy of the room created a delicate balance of emotions. Laura felt her pulse calm, replaced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in the fireplace. It was the warmth of understanding, love, and the beginnings of a renewed life, where she could be fully herself without fear or shame. Ethan eventually reached for the remote and turned the movie back on. It played quietly in the background, but no one was paying much attention. The room was alive in a different way, charged with the subtle dance of emotion. It's the gentle acknowledgement of feelings that had been hidden too long. Laura leaned back into the sofa, resting her head slightly on the cushion, and allowed herself to simply be present. She glanced at David, who met her gaze with a soft smile. And she realized that the spark she had felt all these years, the longing, the quiet affection, was still very much alive. There was no rush, no urgency, only the gentle unfolding of tears. Only the gentle unfolding of emotions that had been waiting for acknowledgement. Ethan watched them with a mixture of amusement and thoughtfulness. "Just don't make it weird for me," he said, small smile tugging at his lips. Laura laughed, the sound soft but genuine. David chuckled too, the tension of the night easing as laughter filled the room. In that shared moment, Laura felt the last of her apprehension melt away. There was love here, of many kinds, romantic, familial, and the quiet, enduring bond that held them together. The rain finally slowed to a soft patter, leaving the world outside glistening under the streetlights. Laura felt a deep sense of calm wash over her. She looked at Ethan, then at David, and whispered softly, almost to herself, "Maybe everything is finally where it's supposed to be." David's hand brushed hers once more, and Laura felt a thrill of warmth. "Maybe it is," he said, quietly matching her tone. Ethan yawned slightly, stretching his arms. "Well, I'm glad you're happy, Mom. That's all that matters." Laura smiled, glancing at him with pride and affection. "Thank you, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It really does mean the world to me." David leaned closer, and their fingers intertwined fully this time. The room seemed to hold its breath, filled with quiet promise, understanding, and a tender kind of anticipation. Laura felt the weight of loneliness she had carried for so long lift slightly, replaced by the comforting certainty that she was no longer facing life alone, not her, not David, not Ethan. As the clock ticked quietly in the background, Laura realized that tonight had been more than a revelation. It had been a bridge from uncertainty to honesty, from hidden longing to gentle acknowledgement, from isolation to connection. And as she looked at the two most important people in her life, she understood that love, in its many forms, could be patient, forgiving, and quietly beautiful. Even amidst storms and secrets, the door to the outside world remained closed. The rain a soft whisper against the walls, and Laura leaned back, allowing herself to simply feel. She had expected a simple movie night. Instead, she had found clarity, understanding, and the possibility of a new beginning. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that no matter what tomorrow brought, this night, this unexpected, stormy, honest night would stay with her forever.